The Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth wish to acknowledge that we are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the beautiful homeland of the MACY Nation.
There's our wonderful intro.
Good morning, welcome back. Facebook Live, we're going to talk a little bit about, first off, I'll quit jumping ahead all the time. My name's Cheryl Alexander. I'm the Knowledge Keeper here at the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth.
I'm John. I am the Youth Engagement Coordinator here at the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth, and thank you for joining us for this episode 2.
Episode 2 of the TRC, and we're going to talk a little bit about last week after taping and reviewing the tape. I realized that we kind of jumped in the water without explaining what the purpose was and what it is that we're actually trying to talk about. So 5 years ago, we actually had the TRC. So it was a big gathering here in Winnipeg, and the reason why was that the first residential schools opened in Canada in 1870s. They were the product of churches and the government, a collective calculated effort to eradicate Indigenous language and culture that the commission called a policy of cultural genocide. So the TRC commission was formed as a means to reckon the devastation, a legacy that forced assimilation and abuse left by the residential school system. So from 2008 to 2014, the TRC Commission heard stories from thousands of residential school survivors. So in the following year of June, here in Winnipeg, they had a reconciliation gathering. And so they released the report. And this report had 94 recommendations. So the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, there's 94. Just this last December in 2020 was 5 years after. So what they did was they asked the commissioners to do an update on what was actually where the progress was. So today I thought as the second piece, I'm going to introduce what the topics are, what the recommendations are, and then where we stand. And then next week, we'll start diving in and picking reconciliation recommendations as to what. Last week, I realized that we need to set the foundation for what the areas are that are actually being talked about. And there's a lot of agencies doing good work out there right now, so I want to be able to highlight some of that. And then other areas that, because this is still going on and we have different types of progress, committed, not even started. So 94 recommendations, that's a lot of area to cover. So the first 5 of the recommendations are in regards to child welfare here in Canada for Aboriginal children. The next 6 would be around education. So those are educational rights, education, post-secondary, regarding Aboriginal children and their legacy. So residential schools, if their parents went, there's a different strain of funding that they're eligible for when they go to post-secondary.
And they're talking about not just the, education that we know of as today. We're talking about even just education, Indigenous languages, and it encompasses everything like that.
Yeah, I'm going to get to the next. The next topic would be around language and culture, because that was one of the big things that they eradicated through the assimilation process was our language and our culture. So it was illegal up until 1954. I can't believe that. I was just when I see that year, I never forget that year. I was just like, that's so close to when I was born. So there's recommendations 13 to 17. So there's 4 around bringing back language, bringing back what it means to have culture in your life and be proud of who you are here in Canada. Then 18 to 24, the recommendations are solely around health. There's a lot of things in health right now that are coming to light. So that's why I wanted to lay the foundation as to why the TRC recommendations and where they sit. So 25 to 42 is about justice. So, and what that means, there's a lot of things that we're going to highlight in the upcoming episodes. And the last ones are around reconciliation, and that's what we're about. That's why we started this online taping, was to highlight the rights of children, but also reconciliation. Talks about how do we meet people and have that conversation going. It doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean that you're not right. It means that we move forward together. So those so from 43 to 94, those are all about the reconciliation. So we'll be starting to talk and pinpointing what, but I just wanted to set the stage for what the TRC is and why the recommendations are so important here in Manitoba for our children, because as the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth, we promote the rights of children.
Yep.
And some of these rights are pertaining to our kids in care.
And sorry, I don't mean to interrupt either, but I think it's important for me as well for children and youth that are watching this to understand 43 to 94 reconciliation and reconciliation, because it's everywhere now, no matter where you go. And it's a good thing. But I guess part of our role is to help children and youth understand, why do we keep hearing
the word reconciliation,
and what does it mean, and why do I keep hearing it? You know what I mean? They go to sports games and these different events that children and youth are going to, so it's helpful for them to understand why this is now all happening, and it's all good things, but it's also important for them to understand, I think.
So of those 94, 5 years later, this is what the breakdown looks like as of January 2021. 23 recommendations have not even been started, looked at, or committed to. So 38 of those recommendations have had a commitment. And when they say commitment, they mean that there's ideas proposed, there's ideas, commitment that means that there's been a gathering to talk about that recommendation, but or even having the funding earmarked for that recommendation. So, and with the pandemic, there's a lot of things that, had to be put on hold. Like, we know ourselves, like having to switch gears from learning to be a drop-in office and getting out to meet with people to having to practice safety procedures. So a lot of our stuff is online now. So I can only imagine that kind of stuff really got pushed aside in terms of having to deal with global pandemic planning. So there is 23 that are in progress, and they're active today. So different agencies, different government projects, different communities. And I'm really glad to say that there is movement. There is initiatives that we're not going to change this overnight. It didn't happen overnight, but it's going to take a long time. And it's going to become a part of the mainstream society. So that's one of the things. There is 10 recommendations that are completed. So as we go through, I'm going to talk about a particular right that where it is on that chart, like of the 94, has it been completed? Has it been not started? Like, where is it and who's doing what for that?
And I think that's helpful for discussions, because especially for the ones the 23 that you're speaking that haven't started, it's good to open up discussions. Why haven't those started? And then have discussions about, okay, so the 10 that are complete, what does that look like now? And does that mean it's done? Or does that mean it's done in a checkbox, but it's an ongoing process still, right?
So one of the things I want to also point out is how things get done, because it's not just the province of Manitoba that's involved. When we're talking about the TRC, a lot of the things that are around Aboriginal become federal issue. So that's the federal government. So getting one government on board is one thing, but getting another government at the same time is also, that's how politics works, unfortunately, that timing is everything, and it's not a quick fix. It takes time to maneuver. So I'm pretty sure that when we talk about some of that stuff, I'm going to put it into a legalese language that we can make kids understand, you know, that this is why we have those excellent child-friendly books in the language that we can talk about some of the recommendations. So I'm really excited to start being able to talk about what some of the different recommendations are and why they're so important for us to see, and where the action is really being done or the inaction, and maybe we can call for action as the recommendations are read out, because they're very wordy, they're very legally, and a lot of times if you don't break it down so people can understand it, they don't really want to deal with it. I remember being a little kid and hearing a lot about government actions. There was one word as a kid I don't hear anymore, and the word was parochial, and it had to do with schools. So I remember that, and I always wondered, I asked my mom and dad, what does that mean? Oh, it's a government term, and blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay. So I like to bring it so that kids understand. They don't have to have the action, but it's good to have conversations. And that's all we're doing, is starting the conversation around the 94 Truth and Reconciliation recommendations.
And I think that's helpful because we're still going to tackle the UNCRC, United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, other weeks as well. But it's a good thing to start talking about the TRC and the 94 calls to action, because, like you said, putting it in simpler terms for people to digest and for children and youth to understand, because, again, they're going to see this everywhere, which is a good thing. But helping them understand why is this becoming a thing? Why is it so important that we learn about these things and discuss these things? Because, again, some schools are doing work regarding the TRC. One of the books that we are fortunate to have from the Winnipeg School Division was a book created by children and youth to simplify the language of the TRC.
That's right.
So it's helpful to share this knowledge.
Yeah. So thank you for tuning in today. Next week, I think the first one that I'd like to talk about is how the first one, reducing the number of Aboriginal children in care. Gonna go right to the top, right?
Yeah.
Bang to the big one.
Yeah.
And that is something that we deal with here, the rights of the children, not just, but that's under child welfare. So that's where we'll start next week. Will be child welfare and Aboriginal children in care. The numbers are very high.
That sounds like a good one. Why not jump right in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us. Again, I'm Cheryl, the Knowledge Keeper here, and
John, Youth Engagement Coordinator. Thank you.